Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. As always, my name is Blake Smith, and with me is my partners in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt and Mr. Ryan Roberts. How are y'all tonight?
Good. I'm excited about the topic tonight. I'm a big history nerd, and man, let me tell you, this has been a very interesting mystery that I've followed since I was a kid, but I think you've done a very deep dive on it, and I'm excited to see.
Spent the last month balls deep in this freaking family, so yeah, we're just gonna go with that.
Because the Romanovs and Rasputin and all that stuff is very, very interesting.
I'm
excited to see where we go with this.
Yeah, and we are definitely going to be covering Rasputin at a later time. He is his own separate podcast episode.
He is. He's a strange individual.
Yes, he is. So, as Ryan said, tonight we're going to be talking about the Romanovs, or Romanovs. That's how it's more accepted overseas over there. But we're going to keep Americanized. Romanovs is how we're going to go with it. I'm going to say first, go ahead, Ryan.
This is America, and this is how we pronounce it here.
Well, and speaking of that, then I'm going to go ahead and say I'm not fluent in like German or Russian or really any other language. Let's be honest. So I'm going to do the best I can to pronounce these subjects and name places and all that crap. But I'm going to use Americanized versions just because it's way more familiar to me.
Yeah.
It'll go a lot easier. So with that, you all ready to dive in? Because I've been itching to tell you the story.
I'm excited.
All right, cool. So we've got to start off with a little bit of a backstory, a little bit of a history lesson. I'm going to try to make it as fun as I can, so that way we can understand where we end up. So we're going to start on November the 1st of 1894. And the Tsar of Russia, Tsar Alexander III, nicknamed, that's Nikki, sorry. Tsar Alexander III, nicknamed the Peacemaker, has suddenly died at the age of 49. And his illness and death were extremely unexpected and had left Russia in shock. Now, his son, the one that I just showed you, the Tsarevich, as he's called at this point, because he's not the Tsar, Nicholas II, he was only 26 years old when he is suddenly thrust to the throne. He is nicknamed Nicky by his family lovingly, and he is quiet, he's ambiguous, and he's very much living in the shadow of his imposing uncle, the Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich. So to be Tsar during this time, to let y'all understand, it's the equivalent of being emperor, field marshal, president, prime minister, pope, name it. Name it.
Rolled into one.
All rolled into one person. The Tsar only has two restrictions: adherence to the Russian Orthodox Church and the laws of secession. All other matters, the Tsar and his will were supreme. So not only does Nicky inherit these duties, but he's also inheriting this colossal Russian empire that consists of 1/6 of the world's land surface, 146 nationalities with many languages, and it's one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. And the Romanovs have ruled this empire for almost 300 years at this point.
That's an insane amount of people under your rule.
I mean, you were talking about people all the way dating back to Catherine the Great and Peter the Great. I know those are two names in history that a lot of people do know. So that's how long this family and this line has ruled so far. And now we get down to Nicky. And their wealth, oh my God, their wealth is beyond computation. Land, diamond and gold mines. Of course, we know the famous Fabergé eggs.
Yep.
Yes. And they've got 20 plus palaces in total. So, I mean, their wealth is massive. So as soon as Nicky becomes Tsar, it's safe to say that he becomes the wealthy and most powerful monarch in the world. So marrying into this world is Princess Alex of Hesse and by Rhine, or Alex of Hesse for short. Now, Alex was supposedly the favorite granddaughter of Queen Victoria. She is shy, she's deeply religious, and brought up in a very tiny German principality. And this religious obsession that she has plays a key role in not only her marriage, but her role as Tsarina of Russia. Now, the couple was only engaged for a few months whenever the Tsar had ended up. This is actually their engagement photo here. When Alexander III passed away, they'd only been engaged for a couple of months, and when Nicky was thrust to the throne. And Nicky wanted Alex by his side whenever he was crowned because her love and her support helped guide him and it gave him confidence. So he ends up moving their wedding date. And they were actually wed less than a month after the death of his father.
Now, are they related? Because I know that most of your monarchs in Europe at this time
are all like related.
Yeah, they're all related to Queen Victoria.
Queen Victoria is known as the grandmother of Europe.
Yeah,
because basically any royal house at this time that is in Europe can be traced back to her, and all the way down to current times with Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip as well in the current royal family. I mean, you can trace it that far down. So yes, they are, if I remember correctly, they were second cousins.
Okay, I was gonna say
Nikki and Alex
related,
was. Yeah. Okay. Nikki and I believe that they were second cousins. So
okay.
And speaking of that, with their union, Nikki and Alex end up becoming related by blood or marriage to the royal households of Great Britain, Denmark, Romania, Germany, Spain, and Greece. I mean, that's how big the grandmother of Europe made her made her own little empire, I guess you could say. But their marriage was one of a little bit different for the times. Their match was actually a love match. And they were one of the only couples, like married couples, to share a marital bed in Europe, a royal marriages, I guess you could say, to share a marital bed at the time. Because that is, even to the current queen that just passed away, that's not something that was done. They slept in separate beds, but these two slept in the same one. And Nikki also sought out Alex's counsel and took her suggestions when it came to making decisions, which was something obviously no other male ruler was going to be doing at this time.
Yeah.
Because that's completely a no-no. Women were not ruling at this time. So once they were married, Alex would end up converting to the Russian Orthodox Church and taking the name Alexandra Feodorovna. She was reluctant at first to do so, but she ends up fully committing to the faith, especially after they start having their children. Now, what's happening in the world this time is these other monarchs had kind of begun to delegate powers out to governing bodies of elected officials. But it was Nikki's belief as emperor of Russia that he alone should hold the power. And that was a belief that Alex shared and supported 100% fully. So not only do you have that, but you have a change taking place in Russia as well. Obviously around the world too. And at the end of the 1800s, you had that telephone replacing the telegram, cars are replacing, carriages, electric lights are replacing lamps. It's the dawn of a modern age when he comes to the throne. And Russia is industrializing at a breakneck speed right now. There's social changes being created as thousands of these workers flock to the big cities, and they're building railways and factories and all that stuff. And workers' rights are completely non-existent at this point. So working conditions are absolutely appalling, to say the least. I think we all know that. And there's this huge push for new political institutions. And in this climate is when Nikki has to give his first speech, this critical climate. And this really could have been a great opportunity for him to seize the show, so to speak, and show what kind of ruler he could be. He could either embrace modernity and democracy or choose to remain an absolute monarch. Well, he ultimately chooses the latter, and in doing so makes a terrible mistake by stamping out any possibility of reformation. And during the early part of his reign, as mentioned earlier, Nikki's most important advisor was his uncle, his Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich. And Sergei is the ultimate Romanov hardliner. He's very dogmatic, extremely right-wing, and highly religious. And he had a lot of influence over Nikki. But Nikki also had very traditionalist views as well, wanted to carry on his father's legacy. And that's what made him, so to speak, choose to remain an absolute monarch. So he gets crowned. We move on to his coronation. His coronation takes place in May of 1896, about a year and a half after he inherits the throne. And what happens in this moment is something that truly will mark him for the entirety of his reign. This coronation that is taking place is juxtaposed against an economic-stricken Russia, and it was this magnificent, majestic, jewel-infested, exquisite event. The rituals are complex and ancient. Everything's designed basically to project wealth and power and the glory of the dynasty. Go ahead.
I'm saying, so you have people in Russia that are pissed off because they don't have workers' rights, but on the same end of the spectrum, you've got this guy. Yeah, he's trying to be a absolute monarch, but like to show off his wealth and grandeur in front of all these people. So
yeah.
Well, that was a coronation. This is a big deal. It doesn't happen all the time. It's always a grand event. Could it have been scaled back? Of course, but are they normally? No.
True,
so
but
if he is following a tradition, it is going to be a big event.
Yeah,
but I'm probably looking at it through hindsight is 2020, and I'm looking at it from like what we know about their history. So
yeah,
right.
That's very true. But the cost of it is absolutely extraordinary. And it really defines that this emperor, this ruler, his power comes from God. That was the whole point of it.
Mm-hmm.
So 4 days after his coronation, the country is having a day of celebration with this festive ball that's going to be taking place that night in honor of the new Tsar and Tsarina. So during the day, there's a location called Kadinka Field in Moscow. There is a public feast that takes place for anyone that wants to come. And good old Uncle Sergey, he's in charge. There's going to be food. There's going to be commemorative gifts that consist of like a handkerchief, a mug, sausage, gingerbread. I mean, it sounds very delightful to a person in Russia, a peasant in Russia who is suffering at this time.
You get a mug and a sausage. Come on.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were starving. There were a lot of Russian people that did not have food. So to be able to go and eat and feast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so initially there was concern for this crowd size that was prior to the event, but Uncle Sergey was like, we good. Go ahead. Well, the field that this was taking place on was badly torn apart by military exercises. It had just a few planks that had been placed down to cover these deep, deep trenches. An event that was designed for 200,000 to 300,000 peasants ends up having 800,000 peasants attend.
Oh, hell.
And there is very little security to monitor the crowd. And these vendors start freaking out. These vendors that are giving these gifts panic. They begin to hurl these gifts into the crowd, and the crowd rushes forward to where the gifts are being thrown from, and people start to fall like dominoes. And they begin to be trampled to death. And when it's all over, there are 2,000 to 3,000 bodies of peasants lying in the coronation field, with several thousands others injured.
Man.
So Nicky's told of this stampede. He's like, dude, they're like, dude, this is what's happening right now on the coronation field. And against his better judgment, Nicky basically, and the Tsarina with the royal family, all of them, they just go, we got a ball to get to. And so instead of basically being the leaders they're supposed to be, intending to the injured, like a normal person would do, they spend the night drinking and dancing away. And it's really kind of from that moment that he is known as Nicholas the Bloody because of that incident. And that's how he begins his first 2 years of his reign.
Man, it just been snake bit from the beginning, it seems like.
Pretty much. So by 1901, Nicky and Alex, they've been busy. They're growing their family. They're attempting to produce this male heir. However, by this time, they have 3 daughters. They have Olga Nikolaevna, Tatiana Nikolaevna, and they have Maria Nikolaevna. Sorry, that's Anastasia. I'll get it down eventually. I have a picture of Maria somewhere, which I'll show later. But anyways, so they have Olga, Tatiana, and Maria. Now, when Alex gets pregnant again, the couple thought, surely this child is going to be the long-awaited male heir that they need. But they're very sorely disappointed. Alex gives birth to their 4th daughter, the Grand Duchess Anastasia Nikolaevna of Russia. Now, in Greek, little fun fact, the name Anastasia, yes, I'm saying Anastasia because that's just how I've been reading it this whole time. I know Americanized is Anastasia, but Anastasia, the name in Greek means the one who is reborn, which I find very interesting for this story. So the reception for Anastasia's birth was not a warm one. Her paternal aunt actually said, by God, what a disappointment, a 4th girl.
What a loving home.
Yeah. But see, the thing is, to be a good Russian czar, you have 2 jobs: produce a male heir and conquer lands. Fail at either of these, and you are considered to be not good. Basically, you suck. You suck at your job. These are your 2 things. So it wasn't until their 5th child that this family gets their long-awaited male heir, and the Tsarevich, Alexei Nikolaevich, is born. and his birth was met with much rejoicing from the family. They were absolutely ecstatic, over the moon. They had the male heir that they needed. However, the celebration ends up turning to despair when just 6 weeks later, because of a bleeding navel, they find out that Alexei suffers from a horrible condition known as hemophilia. Now, sufferers of hemophilia, I'm sure we all know, but those who don't, they're going to bleed from any wound or bruise internally, externally, and every cut that Alexei receives could potentially be fatal.
They bleed excessively.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so Alexei's condition was a little bit more rare because he had inherited one that is known as hemophilia B. Now, he got this from his mother's side because her grandmother, Queen Victoria, was a carrier of hemophilia, which is why a lot of the royal houses in Europe suffer from the disease, is because of her. So because of this, as a caution, Alexei end up being looked after by 2 Navy guards that become his constant companions, so to speak. Now, being an avid follower of the Russian Orthodox faith, Alex was a believer in the power of prayer and prayed over Alexei for a cure against his illness his entire life, which would never come. But she could never understand, with all their power and wealth, how they couldn't find a cure for their son. She just couldn't get it. Because for a monarch to have a hemophiliac as an heir is an absolute disaster. Especially a male heir, because, well, I guess that'd be the only heir that you could have at the time is a male.
Could
That's
not
right.
Ascend to the
I'm
throne,
thinking of modern times. Sorry.
I know.
Because there's a good chance that Alexei could die before his father. So, you know, on top of that, his hemophilia B, every issue that he had, it caused him to be more and more debilitated throughout his life. It wasn't just the bleeding issue. It was, he was becoming kind of an invalid almost, if you will. Very weak. And they know that this condition has to be kept a secret, even from family, because there was no cure. Only those that have to know are going to know. So they start hiding the secret and they go on with life. Now, despite his condition, the Tsarevich and the Grand Duchesses, they lived a very happy and privileged life. I mean, but even with their wealth, Nikki and Alex are determined that their children are not going to be spoiled. So the children lived simply. They were expected to do chores, treat the staff with respect, perform charitable works, visit hospitals, and they slept on cots without pillows. And Nikki and Alex wouldn't let the servants call them by their titles. Instead, they wanted them to use the children's name. And I think because of this, each child was described as very polite, very kind, very pleasant. However, their personalities were very different. You have the 2 eldest daughters, who were Olga and Tatiana. They were lovingly referred to as the big pair. Olga, the eldest sibling, she was most like Nikki. She had a tendency of moroseness. She was considered to be the most stubborn. I think I would get along with her the best. And then you have Tatiana, the second one. She was nicknamed the governess by her siblings because she often took care of them and portrayed a very natural elegance, just like their mother. Then the second set of sisters, Maria and Anastasia, they were similarly or familiarly, did I say it right? Known as the little pair. And they were very close. They shared a room. They dressed alike. Best of friends from everything that I read. Maria, who is the one on the left in this photo, was said to be modest and quiet, but was often described as the most beautiful of all the Grand Duchesses. There was this term that she had known as Maria's eyes or Maria's saucers when she looked at you. And her only true wish was to marry and have a family and a home of her own one day. Now, Anastasia, I think I might be friends with this one too. She was the youngest daughter, and she has this insatiable sweet tooth, is what a lot of people said. She was even known to have a tendency to become plump. Shout out, because of her sweet tooth. Her hair was a dark blonde. She had gray blue eyes, and they were said to flash this mischievous grin, according to the palace staff. She also had a humorous side. She loved to play pranks on her siblings, the staff, and the servants. In an attempt to hide from her tutors, she would climb up trees and refuse to come down, which I hear you, girl. Me too. So her and her studies were like oil and water. They just did not take well to each other. And as a result, you can see this in her diaries. She would always be a poor speller throughout her life. She was intelligent, don't get me wrong, but she had very little patience for schoolwork and would often try to delay her teachings. But despite that, she had a working knowledge of several languages: Russian, French, German, and English. Were you about to say something, Ryan?
I was going to say, we all know those kids who are highly intelligent, and sometimes school just ain't for them.
Everybody say hey. But so she ended up speaking those. She was working knowledge of those 4 languages: Russian, French, German, and English, and she spoke the latter with her mother from the time she was born. However, due to royal marriage or inbreeding, whatever you want to call it, Anastasia was plagued with challenges throughout her life. She would only reach a height of 5 foot tall, fully grown. She suffered from weak back muscles, as well as these excruciating bunions on her feet that caused her to have this unusual gait when she walked. So, yeah, even the royal can suffer from bunions.
That's my new band name. Excruciating bunions.
Excruciating bunions. That's a good one. But the thing is even though they lived simply, they still had a royal upbringing. I mean, they're a royal family. They had royal bloods, royal titles, royal positions, royal relatives. I mean, nothing about this family was normal. Let's just be honest. They spent time at holiday family gatherings, balls, parties, and they either went aboard the royal yacht or lived out of one of the many Romanov palaces that they had. Were you going to say something, Shelley? I thought I saw you open your mouth. Sorry.
Listening.
Oh, okay. Now, throughout all this time of them growing up, we're going to fast forward through Russia a little bit. You have the industrialization and unsafe working conditions. You also have now low wages, and there's a lot of discontent and unrest that Nikki's having to contend with now. And it's because those that were once spread out in the country are now living next to each other, and they're sharing their discontent. And so you have protests that begin against the Tsar's regime. Now, on top of this, keep in mind, Alex and Nikki are keeping this horrible secret about their son's condition. And we begin to see that go into the decision-making that started happening at this time. Russia is currently at war with Japan during this time. And Nikki feels this enormous pressure to expand the empire, which is his second thing he must do as Tsar. He's got his male heir. Now he needs to get some more lands. I guess 1/6 of the world's surface wasn't enough. And he has this weird fairy tale image of what his empire should look like based off books that he read from the 17th century during the early reigns of the Romanovs. And he's also a dogmatic decision maker and consistently ignores the advice from good policymakers. That's not a good combination.
No.
So when he sees this opportunity in the Far East for expansion, he takes it. Well, this imposes on Japan's territory, and they say, hold on, wait a minute. We ain't going to have that. That's not cool. So we're going to go to war. And he was like, cool, let's go to war, because he was sure if he won this war, Japan would never dare to go against him again, which was a massive misjudgment. Japan decimates their troops.
Oh, yeah.
And so Nikki decides, hey, we're losing. Let me just send the entire Baltic fleet to them real quick. Now, the Baltic fleet was the mainstay of Russia's power. And again, the Japan completely decimates their numbers. So Japan is obviously winning this war, and things start going from bad to worse. The people are like, screw this, we've had enough. They start calling for a representative government. They are tired of the Tsar's regime. And in early 1905, it all comes to a head the first time, we'll say. Now, a very watered down version of the events that that leads up to this is you have the Russian military beginning to mutiny. Worker strikes begin to break out. Civil unrest is running rampant throughout the country. And on top of that, Nikki is absolutely oblivious to any of this. He still believes this unbroken bond between him and the Russian people is still solid.
Because he's ordained by God to be in that chair.
That's it.
Right.
Yep. And you have this animosity towards Nikki increasing after an event known as Bloody Sunday. I mean, this man could not get away from things known as bloody. So what ends up happening is that there is a group of unarmed protesters that's led by a Russian Orthodox priest. They're all demanding better working conditions, and they march towards the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, which is this lovely building. Isn't it just so quaint? And so they're going to go petition or present a petition to the Tsar. Now, this was a peaceful protest. However, as the crowds gathered, drew larger, Alex starts panicking, thinking of the children. She decides, you know what? We need to go ahead and get the hell out of here. And Nikki, instead of sitting there and receiving his subjects and listening to them, he panics as well. And he basically hightails it and runs it too, which is a huge missed opportunity. I mean, he had the opportunity to symbolically play exactly this character he saw himself as, this divinely appointed czar listening to the cries of his people. And he didn't do it. He hightailed and ran.
It's just a comedy of errors all the way around. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I agree. I see what you're saying. I mean, it's just misjudgment after misjudgment.
Yeah, he's making bad decisions left and right.
Yeah. So as the group nears the Winter Palace, the guards that are standing outside, who have been given permission to shoot if necessary, panic as well. It's like nobody could just hold tight for a second. Don't panic. And they start firing warning shots into the air. However, some of these shots go into the trees where children have climbed into and end up hitting the children. And this causes mass hysteria, and it ends with 1,000 protesters' deaths and double that many wounded. And that, of course, followed rioting and looting over the next couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
As this now once popular czar is being criticized by supporters, and they're saying, we no longer have a czar. And this moment is what radicalizes these revolutionary authorities who begin to gather into factions. So they decide, these revolutionary authorities, when the cries of the Russian people aren't being heard, you know what? We're going to act. And there's two things that happen that change this into a completely different direction to, I guess, can it get more worse? I don't know. I would say a worse direction, but I guess it can.
Oh, it can.
Yeah. The first you have is one of the Russian revolutionary authorities, Ivan Kalyayev, sees an opportunity. When Uncle Sergei is traveling by himself alone in his carriage, I guess that's what by himself is, in his carriage by himself without his wife, who was Elizabeth Fyodorovna. That is actually Alex's eldest sister. So they kind of cross paths, like Nikki and Alex married, and then Alex's sister married Nikki's uncle. So Uncle Sergei's traveling by himself. Well, Kalyayev lights a nitroglycerin bomb, tosses it into the carriage. It lands on Sergei's lap, explodes, kills him instantly. There's a lot more graphic nature that goes along with that. Elizabeth is actually running out into the streets, collecting his body parts, and basically, because she was there, she just wasn't in the carriage. And second, more troops have been decimated by Japan, so now Russia is being humiliated on a global scale at these sheer numbers that they're losing in this battle. So it's after both of these instances that Nikki decides to cave, and he gives the Russian people this representative government, what's known as a Duma, that they've been requesting. The only thing is, it's very weak. It doesn't hold much power. Nikki retains autocratic rule, and he knows he can veto that Duma at any point. He is more focused right now at tracking down these revolutionaries than anything. And this is where we see a large number of them being arrested and sentenced to death. Some report as high as 15,000 revolutionary authorities are killed at this time, arrested and sentenced to die.
So this Duma is just a show government, basically.
It's to give them something to do to shut them up for a little while.
Yeah.
So, thanks, guys. People are in the comments saying, words are hard, Blake. It's okay. Yes, they are. Tonight. They are. It's all good.
Especially when part of them are Russian.
Y'all just wait. Wait till we get towards the end. So, by the end of this year and into the spring of the next, this is where two paths cross that probably should have never crossed. The Romanovs and Rasputin.
Oh, boy.
Here we go. Grigory Rasputin. Now, for those who don't know, Rasputin allegedly had the ability to heal. We're just going to lead with that. He did have an ability to calm Alexei, which enabled the bleeding to be able to stop. If you couple that with Nikki and Alex's desperation and their deeply religious beliefs and the belief in the power of the prayer, you kind of understand why they turned to Rasputin the way that they did. So Rasputin is called into the imperial family by Alex, who had heard of this, quote, holy man that came from Siberia. And Rasputin jumps at this opportunity. Now, I'm not going to go much into his history. I'm going to gloss over it, but you got to have to know a little bit about this strange fucker to understand where we're going. So his childhood is absolutely a mystery. The only thing that really is known about it is that he ends up leaving his village. Some say banished. Some say it's a religious pilgrimage that he goes on. We're just going to say he left. We'll go deeper into another episode. And he leaves his wife and his children behind. He'd been raised in a Russian Orthodox church as well. But on his pilgrimage, he comes to a Russian monastery, Verkhoturye, which is in north central Russia, where he starts to learn the Gospels more and more by heart, becomes steeped in Russian Orthodoxy. But there's too much control, order, discipline, and routine. So Rasputin
don't like that at all.
No, he's not. No, he does not. He is a free spirit, and he kind of starts traveling around and cobbling together his own version of holy teachings.
Yeah, he's a holy heathen is what he is.
Yeah, pretty much. And that takes place over the next 2 years. He's visiting these different holy sites until he stumbles across the Klisti. Now, the Klisti is a group, they're illegal, by the way, at this point. They operate in secret, and they engage in all sorts of wild, orgiastic rites and rituals. But they have this logic that underlies it all. Basically, if one does not sin, one cannot repent. If one cannot repent, one cannot be saved. So, have at it, people. Sin
if you
away.
Want to go to heaven, you got to screw up and say you're sorry.
Yeah. If you want to get to heaven, you got to raise a little hell.
That's true. However, I'm going to mention right here, some historians and even his own daughter debate the claims that he was involved in this group. So I'm not going to go further into that. What we do know about him that is legendary is his sexual appetite. He also, even though he vowed to abstain from alcohol, he was a heavy drinker. And he begins to adopt this idea of sin leading to redemption as his own faith as he's traveling around gaining these followers. And he's perfectly positioned to take advantage of individuals seeking to pursue this idea of spiritualism sweeping the globe at the time, because we've covered that in many podcasts, that this is the time of spiritualism. And in doing so, he begins to run around in the upper echelons, I guess you could say, of Russia until he's introduced to two princesses who were married to Nikki's cousins. So that's where the kind of connection comes in. His reputation is beginning to kind of precede him at this point as a healer and a mystic, because of a man. Anastasia
allegedly can tell the future.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, this is what he looks like.
Yeah, I wouldn't want him near my children.
True. So
he looks like
serial killer ass somewhere else.
He's like, you kids want to see a dead body?
Yeah, if he was in the modern world, he would drive a white panel van.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Rasputin's rice cakes, that's what it would say on the side. But anyway, so once the imperial family meets Rasputin, this deep friendship between him, Nikki, and Alex start to form. Alex's religious beliefs led her to believe that during Rasputin's travels as a holy man, he had truly come closer to God. She believes wholeheartedly that he was sent to them by God, that he possessed the power to heal through prayer, that his petitions to God were given special favor, and that what he told them came straight from God, him or herself, whatever you believe in. And Alex believed that through this, her son Alexei is going to be saved because they have Rasputin in their life. And this is all put to the test in spring of 1907. Alexei ends up taking a very hard fall. There's swelling. He's hemorrhaging internally. So Alex urgently sends for Rasputin, who comes to the palace and begins to pray over Alexei. Now, the following morning, Alexei's condition is greatly improved, almost to the point to where he is basically fully recovered. And that seals it for Alex. I mean, she becomes completely convinced of his gifts. My opinion, he calmed him down. He got the doctors away to let the stress in his body lower so that his body naturally healed itself overnight, kind of, so to speak, and that it calmed everything.
The child was probably kept immobile. Wasn't, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, is he a mystic, or did he just make the right moves?
I don't know, man. There's just so many instances, though, where Alexei is hurt and he shows up and somehow Alexei miraculously gets better. I don't know if he was doing something. Maybe he had some sort of, I don't know. He's just a mysterious person. I mean, he could have had some sort of.
Or perhaps it was just the power of suggestion.
That
Rasputin's here.
too.
You're going to be fine. Okay. Then the child's like, I'm going to be fine. And one of the main instances that he had been given or had gained favor was there's a very famous story about how Alexei begins to bleed out of his ear, and Rasputin goes over and whispers into his ear, and it stops bleeding miraculously. Well, okay, how long had it been bleeding? Was about done bleeding? But that's a very famous passed through story about how he whispers into Alexei's bleeding ear and Alexei stops bleeding. And that was part of the hold that he had over that the Tsar and the Tsarina, was that apparently he could fix their children. And what person would not want to have someone who, if something goes wrong with my child, he's right there and he can make it better.
Mm-hmm.
No. So over the next 5 years, as the revolution carries on, the Russian Revolution, Rasputin becomes somewhat of a guru in upper Russian society. He is given a position in court as a court lamplighter, and he gains a much larger following, primarily women. And all the while, Alex is becoming more and more dependent on him, to the point that she begins to take his counsel and advice on government and political situations, so that she basically can report back to Nikki. Now, throughout all of this, the rumors begin to fly about Rasputin and his relationship with the Tsar's daughters and his closeness with the family. Now, he is actually reported to Alex as being seen in the Grand Duchess's bedroom late at night when they were in their night clothes, the daughters being between the ages of 11 and 17 at the time.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so all that's done is that he's simply advised by Nikki to avoid the children's bedrooms. That's it.
You in my daughter's bedroom, and you a almost 40-year-old man, and she 14. I'm gonna kick your ass and wait for somebody else.
Yeah.
You are not.
You got no damn business in there. No.
Absolutely not.
Yep.
And I'm surprised Tsar Nicholas did not do something stronger.
I mean, he's in such a fucking dire situation. I guess he felt like he couldn't.
He's a damn czar.
Well, and
he's a czar, but at the same time,
right?
I think a lot of it had to play into the love he had for his wife and the love he had for his son.
Saying. Yeah,
I think he realized how much Rasputin helped his wife by just being there, which in turn helped his son. So I think he felt his hands were tied a little bit on what he could possibly do.
That's
because at this point, Alex was very adamant that she had to have Rasputin.
Mm-hmm.
She had to
you can have him, and he can stay right over there.
Yeah,
and that's what he did. That's what he told her. He's like, "You stay there in my daughter's bedroom."
Yeah, no.
I think had it been any other situation, he would have been probably axed,
killed right there. Yeah,
more than likely.
Because Rasputin
I would hope
was known
so.
to drink in the evening, especially, and be he was known to be drunk at all hours of the day or night. It just he kind of stayed in this state of inebriation from reports. He wanders into the girl's bedroom drunk, and he's probably drunk, and he didn't have a real good reputation. So
no,
get out of those kids' rooms, you weirdo.
Yeah. So the Romanovs either still don't understand or don't want to understand what's taking place outside the palace with this revolution that's happening while all this is going on with Rasputin. At this time, Nikki's anti-Semitic views end up growing. He basically saw the Jewish community as part of the problem with the revolution. And at the same time, these reports of Rasputin's visits with the Grand Duchesses late at night are actually leaked to the public. So the rumors really begin to fly that Rasputin has this political influence over Nikki through his relationship with Alex. And that turns into the rumor spreading that Rasputin and the Tsarina herself are having an affair.
Do we know if they ever had intercourse?
So everything that I read, everything interview-wise with historians that I watch, documentaries, podcasts, everything that I get my hands on, all of them say that they could almost say with 100% fact that nothing physical actually ever took place between the Tsarina and Rasputin himself.
Okay.
That it really strictly was
make a pass at her or something, but that she loved the Tsar.
She loved Nikki.
Husband.
They both loved each other very much.
She needed Rasputin. She loved her husband. So
he was like her emotional support guru.
Yeah.
I guess you could say. You know, like you have your little chihuahua. That was Rasputin.
Yeah. He was her emotional support yak. Is that what you called him?
Emotional support yak. Yeah, exactly. Hell, he looks like emotional support yak. Shit. So this investigation ends up getting opened into Rasputin, and many accusations come out about his lewd behavior. There are allegations of rape against him from some of the women in his village. And this alleged affair with Alex begins to paint Alex in an even darker light. She was already under suspicion for being German born. She was considered dour and too serious, obviously making her an easy target for criticism. But the point is she's being painted in a darker light now. So the public begins to openly criticize Nikki and Alex for their friendship with Rasputin. And during this, there's actually several attempts to assassinate Rasputin, including one from church officials, but none ever, there's never an end result. Rasputin's still alive. And overall, this discontent with the Romanovs grows and grows and grows. Now, on June 29th of 1914, World War I breaks out when the Archduke Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie were assassinated by Bosnian Serb. And that's an issue because Serbia is backed by Russia and Austria is backed by Germany. And not only was Germany Europe's greatest military power at the time, but it's also Alex's homeland. And Rasputin begins to write these letters to Nikki instructing him, do not go to war, don't go to war. And Alex is begging and saying, please, it's my people, it's my home, please don't go to war.
And that's also Nikki's cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm, is
at
the
Kaiser
helm of Germany.
Yep. But ultimately, Nikki makes this decision, we have to go to war. And Russia is dragged into World War I. And this really, for me, is kind of the beginning of the end for the Romanovs and their dynasty and kind of the shit slinging. It just gets 10 times worse from here on out. So as this war drags on into 1915, Nikki assumes command over the Russian army, which is heavily advised against because now, where there was initial enthusiastic support for the war, he has now got the death of the soldiers on his shoulders. So Alex tries to combat that. She opens up many of the palaces and turns them into makeshift hospitals. And the nation kind of rallies against the common enemy, Alex's homeland. However, Nikki realizes really quick, hey, I'm not brave enough to command these troops. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, so to speak. So he ends up appointing the family's favorite soldier, which is Grand Duke Nicholas Nikolaevich, or Nicolasha for short, which is the first cousin of Nikki's father. Now, once Nicolasha has command of the troops, he advises Nikki straight out the gate. Once he has control, Nikki hands it over. He says, show Rasputin the back door. Get him out. And again, because Nikki's so well known to do this, he doesn't listen to good advisors like that. So when Nicolasha takes over, at first it appears that Russia's doing well in this war. But this army consists of untrained peasants who aren't even really sure why they're fighting in this war. They don't get it. And Nicolasha is certain that in the beginning of days, they could just end this war, drive into Berlin and be done with it. But Germany ends up quickly turning this around. And so Alex and the children try their best to help the soldiers who are coming back mangled and bloody and all this stuff. Really just where children should not be. That's where these children were, in these hospital. And she's searching for something during this time. Like, why are we at this war? Why are we doing that? Now, Rasputin has been banned back to his village. Not banned. Sent. I'll say sent. Banned's too strict of a word. Sent back to his village for the time being right now. And once Alex starts having all these questions that she doesn't have the answers to, guess who shows back up because she sends for him? Her good old trusted advisor, Rasputin. He's back in the picture. Yay. And he's got all the answers. He's got the faith. And Alex just blindly follows him. Now, what happens next is probably my favorite story out of this entire episode. So there's a local restaurant in Moscow once upon a time. And this local restaurant is called the Yar. And there is this great time being had there. And of course, who's there? Rasputin. Now, at the time, while this party's being had, there is this incredibly toxic rumor in the press, as well as the illustrations have now started, pornographic illustrations of Rasputin and Alex together in this very sordid affair and sexual situations. And it was assumed that they must be sleeping together, for since he's returned, he's back, they have to be having sex. Anyways, Rasputin gets blind drunk at this restaurant. He proceeds to start to boast about his influence over the Tsarina. And he pulls down his pants, pulls out his penis, and continues to brag about the power that he has over the Tsarina. And of course, this does nothing to quell the rumors. It ignites them. I mean, hello, he whipped out his junk and was like, look at the power I have over her. This is it. Woohoo.
He said, helicopter.
So, and it's really after this that there's a succession of decisions that are made that aren't the smartest decisions by the Romanov family. So later in 1915, Nicky comes back and he goes, hey, I might not have been brave, the time before to lead the troops, but God has spoken to me to once again take control of the Russian army. So he goes to the front line, he fires Nicholasha, and he resumes the command. An utterly unwise decision at the point.
Just bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. This guy is not fit to rule.
Yeah, I would agree. So after leaving St. Petersburg, or what it was known back then, I'm going to call it what is known back then was Petrograd at the time. He leaves the government under the influence of his wife, the Tsarina, and her advisors, which included Rasputin. Now again, Alex was never popular in Russian society, and you've now left the country in the hands of a German-born Tsarina and a Russian charlatan monk in quotation marks, in the midst of this massive global war. And Alex is not the best one to be left in charge. She's becoming paranoid. It's at this time that she is actually using heavy drugs, including opioids, and her relation with Rasputin is a lot like ours. It's very codependent. So the two of them, Alex and Rasputin, is who we're talking about now, begin this very toxic partnership together. And Nicky starts to receive these letters from Alex over and over, almost on the daily, advising him not to listen to anyone else at the time, only to, quote, our good friend Rasputin, for he alone knows how best to act. And by now, Nicky's deemed useless and irrelevant at the front line.
She's been completely Svengali by him.
She has. 100%. And the Russian army is in this great retreat. They're losing cities, and it appears that Germany, or the German army, can basically push right into Russia and take control if they want to. And now Nicky is essentially taking military and political orders from Rasputin through his wife. So Nicky's now in a crisis as the people begin to wonder what the whole point of him is. Why do we have a czar? Why, if he's listening to this guru douchebag, why
who's ruling here?
Yeah, who's ruling? And they begin to become outraged in his involvement, Rasputin's involvement in domestic affairs. So just to put it in perspective, between 1915 and 1917, Alex and Rasputin push and convince Nicky to fire 4 prime ministers, 3 war ministers, and 5 interior ministers. Most of these are at the behest of Rasputin's behest for they wanted people who would outright just blindly defend Rasputin at all costs. So this completely...
They're like a whole bunch of yes men.
Yep, basically. And this completely destabilizes an already disrupted and foundering government because of the war. So the Tsar's reputation completely collapses because of this amongst the military, and all faith in his regime and as a monarch is at a rock bottom. And now the Grand Duchesses are being brought into it because once thought to be the symbol of the country, these ideas of ideal womanhood, I guess you could say, is what they were perceived as, in this innocence that they had. It completely disintegrated. And this childlike behavior as well that they appeared to have completely vanished. People started seeing them in a different light. One of these soldiers watching is a guy named Yakov Yurovsky. He is a medical orderly on the front line who sees the hell that these soldiers are going through at this time. Now, there's going to be more on him here in just a little bit, but I'm going to press on for now. During all this, there had already been several attempts on the Tsar by this time, all of which failed as well. And Nicky's response was to move the family from St. Petersburg to the Alexander Palace in Tsarskoye Selo, which is 15 miles south of St. Petersburg in Western Russia. So here, the issue is the family became even more isolated from the Russian people. The only reprieve, I guess, that they had was visiting Nikki's younger sister, which was Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrina, that one. The lady on the screen, in St. Petersburg. And here it was where they could, do entertainment and have balls and all this kind of stuff. And that was it. That was their social life that they had. Other than that, they were in Tsarskoye Selo in the palace with each other. So they became very, very close during this. But Alex, at this point, is being perceived as actively trying to undermine the Russian war effort and is widely believed to be a German spy by now. And people are completely convinced that Alex and Rasputin are the ones running the show, and the upper echelons of Russia, I guess you could say, I just love saying that word, echelons, they're becoming increasingly disturbed with the alleged affair between the Tsarina and Rasputin.
Well, and in all fairness, they're not wrong about who's running the country. It is the Tsarina and Rasputin. They're not wrong on that.
Yeah.
So
not only are they distancing themselves from the Russian people, they're distancing themselves from their noble friends and their own family. I mean, they're putting walls up at this point. And Russia's in this surreal situation. Everything seems out of control. And all of Russia is aligned against Rasputin. And much of the wider Romanov family know that to save the dynasty, they must save Nikki and Alex from the influence of Rasputin and from themselves as well. I mean, they're criminally negligent at this point. They're incompetent. And either they truly don't understand that their situation is dire, or worse, they don't care. They don't know which one it is.
Mm-hmm.
So one of these individuals in the wider Romanov family is Felix Yusupov. He is the son of one of the richest families in Russia, and he is a very interesting character. He's highly promiscuous. He's bisexual. He's highly intelligent. He's married to Nikki's niece, and he's best friends with a lot of the Grand Dukes, which are Nikki's brothers and uncles. And he hatches this plan with a group of other nobles to neutralize Rasputin, as the way he put it. But it all hinges on Rasputin, who knows that his days are numbered. So a plan is hatched, and Felix Yusupov ends up right in the middle of it, along with another Russian aristocratic tied to the royal family, which is Dmitry Pavlovich. Others involved would include Dmitry here and one of the members of the State Duma that we talked about earlier, which is Vladimir Purishkevich. So Vladimir here says in the Duma, quote, the Tsar's ministers who have been turned into marionettes whose threads have been taken firmly in hand by Rasputin and the Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, the evil genius of Russia, and the Tsarina, who has remained a German on the Russian throne, are alien to the country and its people. I mean, he's not
mincing words here.
No, he's not. So according to Yusupov, what happens on December the 30th of 1916 is as follows. Rasputin is lured to a place known as Moika Palace, which was the Yusupov Palace. And after arriving, Rasputin slid down into the basement of the home, and the area is set up for his arrival. There's things to eat, there's things to drink. And once in the basement, after some small talk, Rasputin's offered some of the small cakes and some tea, which he accepted. Now, allegedly, the small cakes had been laced with poison, cyanide, according to Yusupov, to be exact. And after consuming the cakes, to Yusupov's astonishment, nothing happened. Rasputin then asked for, or was offered, one of the two, some wine, which had also been poisoned. And again, after drinking 3 glasses, nothing happens. And it appeared that Rasputin was not going to suffer any ill effects due to this poisoning. So Yusupov allegedly goes and tells the remainder of the group that is there, while also grabbing a gun. With their poisoning plan unsuccessful, Yusupov returns to the basement where Rasputin is, opens the door, walks in, points the gun at Rasputin, and says, quote, look at the crucifix and say a prayer, and fires a shot and shoots Rasputin in the chest. Rasputin instantly drops to the ground, and his body laid still. And they were like, we did it. Woohoo! He's done. He's neutralized. So one of the men grabs the coat, put Rasputin's coat and hat, puts it on. These guys load up. They take this guy in Rasputin's coat and hat over to Rasputin's apartment to be dropped off so that witnesses could say that he, quote, made it home safely. And they go back to the Moika Palace. They go back down into the basement to go clean up their dirty deed. To their horror, Rasputin has revived somehow, and he jumps up, attempts to attack Yusupov, and makes a run out of the house. He makes it just about as far as the palace's courtyard before Purushkevich shoots him 2 more times as the group gathers around him and begins to beat Rasputin until he is again still. At this point, they actually have succeeded. Rasputin is dead, and they wrap him up in a piece of cloth. They take him to the Petrovsky Bridge and dump his body over the side into the water. And his body is discovered beneath the ice several days later. Now, the autopsy would conclude that Rasputin had been shot 3 times, once in the left side of his chest, in the back, and the fatal shot once in his forehead. I think that would pretty much do the job. But there was no traces of poison, leading people to believe that the poison story was hearsay. And obviously his lungs were not full of water. So they're like, yeah, he was killed before he, wound up in the river. So they end up burying Rasputin in Tsarskoye Selo near the palace where the imperial family is currently at. And Alex is utterly devastated. Nobody was invited except for a few close friends and family. Not even Rasputin's own family was invited. However, they were invited to a little meet and greet with the imperial family after the funeral. Yeah. How do you like that? Hey, come have some tea and crumpets with us, but you can't see us bury him. I'd be like...
and I feel sorry for Alex because Alex is doing all of this. I think at some point Alex had to know that Rasputin was a charlatan and was trying to take them for all that they had, but she loved her son so much that
was the issue.
That she went along with whatever Rasputin wanted to do.
Yeah, he probably would say, well, I'll take the treatments away and your child will die if you try to send me away. Who knows? She might have on several occasions tried to send him away. And he says, fine, if I leave, your kid dies. I mean, knowing what we know about Rasputin's character, that wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility.
Well, the thing is he comes in and he goes out and he does the damage that he does in the time that he's with the family, and it cannot be undone.
Oh, no.
I mean, they are on a collision course with just straight up disaster, obviously.
There's a reason we still talk about him today.
Yeah.
He is one of the most infamous characters throughout history.
Yeah. So Felix Yusupov and Dmitry Pavlovich, the 2 that were involved in Rasputin's death, they're actually exiled out of the country for their involvement. Couldn't find anything that happened to Purushkevich, the one that shot him 2 more times. But so with Rasputin's death and without his influence, there's this moment and chance for redemption for the Romanov family. What are you going to say, Ryan?
You got to think that Nicky at this point is probably relieved because he's like, I didn't have to do anything. Somebody else did it for me. So he's comforting his wife, but secretly he's probably like, yes, it's fucking gone.
There have been many times where he wanted to send Rasputin away. I did not include that because it would have made the episode way, way, way too long because there was a lot of times. And I think that Rasputin's death was kind of like a breath of fresh air for him, that he's like, okay, I can show that I can do this now.
Here's a reset. Let's get restarted.
Yeah. So, and that was the thing with the Russian people too. They believed that he would see the light, so to speak, give up his absolute power, make the changes necessary for the Russian people, and allow for this more progressive form of government to take control. But they quickly realized that it actually wasn't Rasputin governing Nicky. It was Nicky governing Nicky. And Nicky and Alex remain determined to hold on to that absolute power. So in early 1917, Nicky leaves for military headquarters again. And on this day, there's this huge strike at an armory in town. And he really does leave the moment that Russia needs its czar to hold this country together. Now, throughout the day, more and more workers gather throughout Petrograd and begin to turn towards revolution as their only hope for this economic crisis that they're facing. And at the very radical edge of the revolutionary parties are the Bolsheviks, which are led by Vladimir Lenin. And his vision of the working class rule includes the entire annihilation of the royal family, including the Tsar himself.
Which I don't know if you're going to get into it or not. He was in exile in Germany at the time, and then was sent back into Russia. And some people think he may have been an agent of disruption sent by the German government into Russia to kind of get Russia out of the war.
He's another one that can have a whole nother episode on.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
Gonna just kind of barely touch on him in this episode because this one's more about the Romanovs. So now we talked about him earlier, Yakov Yurovsky. He comes back into play. He begins to turn, men like him and himself begin to turn towards the Bolshevik party. So in February of 1917, this unrest that's growing, Alex and the children are holed up in Alexander Palace, which is this lovely small home that they have, while these riots and violence begin to sparsely kind of break out in the city. Nikki's still away, but he's back on the front line where he is yet again proving to be extremely useless. So this resentment comes to a head in early March of 1917 on what is now known as National Women's Day. This is actually the backstory of International Women's Day. And it's when hundreds of thousands of women flood the street to protest bread shortages, and they end up adding to the ranks of those already protesting with the revolution. And Nikki and Alex, yet again, I don't know if they were just taught wrong or something. They're completely unable to understand what's happening with these protests. I don't know if it was something because his father was the peacemaker. So I don't know if it's just something that they never witnessed.
Well, I was going to say, they lived a life of privilege their entire life. So I don't think they understand the plight of common people. Maybe. I mean, I would guess that's what the deal is. I mean, even though they raised their children not to be spoiled, still, I think there's got to be some kind of disconnect.
Yeah.
Where they just don't understand, like, I'm ruling these people. Why? They should be grateful that I'm ruling them. Why are they,
I'm chosen by God.
I'm ordained. This is my country. Why do they feel the way that they do? I can only imagine that's got to be what it is. It's like a disconnect because they've been raised in a life of privilege and have never had to deal with the plight of what the common person has had to deal with.
Yeah. I would agree with that 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So Alex is again running the government. Yay! She's running the Russian government. She's mourning the death of Rasputin, and she believes that this revolution is a bunch of hooligans, and that the army is going to support them and be with them throughout all of this. So as the women grow into the protesting ranks already, this thing swells to over 200,000 individuals who were now standing in the street calling for the overthrow of the government is what's happening. So Nikki's like, shit, my family's back home. I'm not there. They're in trouble. He ends up standing in the Petrograd military as well as the Marine Guard to protect his family. And he begins his journey home. He's like, I've got to get home. However, the military obeys orders for protection. And somehow, I'm sure somebody panicked. Gunfire yet again breaks out into the crowd and hundreds are killed. One child, and this is kind of gruesome, is basically crucified with bullets on a fence. And essentially seeing what they've done, this military is like, dude, I'm done. And they like throw down their guns and they join the protests. I mean, that was like the final straw from them. So despite this massacre that has just taken place, the very next day, the crowd descends on the Alexander Palace again, where the Tsarina and the children are. And unfortunately, the children have come down with the measles at this moment. And so Alex is like, nope, we're not moving them. They're sick. And she's like, we're in a fortified house, palace, whatever. We're protected. It's fine. But what she doesn't know is that right now the Russian army is dissolving. There are mass desertions as entire battalions begin to walk away from the front. They're making their way into these larger cities. They're grabbing and waving red flags in defiance against the government. And it's kind of a strange moment in history because, as Ryan said earlier, Stalin's in Serbia, Lenin's in Switzerland at this moment. It's truly a rare, spontaneous revolution with calls coming from the crowds from unnamed men. I mean, it's not like they had a leader. They didn't have any leadership, really. It was just this spontaneous group. So after these repeated attempts to get the imperial family to leave, Alex remains defiant, thinking that this is something that the guards can handle. 200,000 protesters, yeah. So they remain inside. Outside, things grow even more. One of the Petrograd soldiers walks up and assassinates an officer who just a couple of days prior had slapped him during these protests. And almost instantaneous, at this regime that was under this officer drops their guns, joins the revolution. And it becomes very apparent that the one thing that Nicky needed and knew could hold Russia together was the one thing he had just lost control over, and that was the military.
Yep.
So in an attempt to draw the imperial family out, the crowds begin to effectively render this palace useless by cutting off water and electricity. And the notice finally comes that the Marine Guard, the one thing keeping the protesters out of the palace, has also just deserted their posts. And the imperial family are now sitting ducks.
Uh-oh.
So word reaches Nicky that the Marine Guard has abandoned their post, and being the family man that he is, he immediately begins to offer concessions. But it's too late. I mean, there's nothing at this point that Nicky could do to repair this political situation. He offers to make the representative government, the Duma, much stronger and offers to give it more control. But his words are useless. He truly, at this point, has only one move left. And on his way home, his train is actually stopped and diverted in Pskov, which is about 3.5 hours from home, where all he can do is sit and wait. He attempts to send more troops to his family in Petrograd, but he also knows that any troops that he sends are going to be lost to mutiny. And in a very rare move and a unanimous decision from his advisors, which included the Admiral of the Baltic Fleet and Anastasia, the one that he keeps hiring and firing, they force Nicky to capitulate, and he's told he needs to use his last move. Renounce the throne in favor of his son Alexei, with his brother, Grand Duke Michael Alexandrovich, as regent until Alexei is of age. And this really is truly one of the most crucial, important moments of the 20th century that has probably ever taken place, because with one pen stroke, he eliminates over 300 years of Romanov rule. And that sends shockwaves around the world. He literally ends the last full autocracy in Europe. But he doesn't do it the way that his advisor tell him. Instead of abdicating in favor of his son, he does it in favor of his brother, because he realizes that his son has this condition and may not outlive his father. So he may not be Tsar anyways. So his brother, Grand Duke Michael, what?
So that would draw even more suspicion from the Russian people. They're like, okay, well, why did he transfer to? So that just makes him look even weaker at this point.
Yeah.
And potentially he didn't want his son to have any kind of target on him, because they knew if anybody made an attempt on Alexei, that Alexei would not survive it.
Yeah.
No.
But instead of giving it to Alexei, he gives it to his brother. I'm sure the Russian people are kind of like, well, that's odd. Why is
that's not... that's not the line of succession.
Yeah.
And that was one of the two things he had to follow was Orthodox Church and the line of succession. Those were the two that he had to be held to. And he decides he ain't gonna do it like that.
Yep. And so he gives it to his brother, Grand Duke Michael. And Michael remains Tsar for one day. One flipping day. Because he realizes this is a shitstorm of a fireball that he has been given, and he too walks away from it. And it is now obvious that Russia does not have a Tsar, and the country is sent into political chaos. So immediately following this, the Romanovs are put under house arrest by a newly formed provisional government, and their captivity begins on March 21st of 1917. They're first held at the Alexander Palace, which is where they know, and guarded over by the new provisional government soldiers. And at the heart of this new provisional government is a man named Alexander Kerensky. And he is in charge of the safety of the imperial family, who only a short time ago was calling for their overthrow. So the imperial's family servants are dismissed, but yet over 100 staff members still remained. And in their captivity, they had these new rules that they had to follow. The phone line's been cut. Their belongings are going to be are searched frequently. And as members of society now, they're going to survive on a ration of food. Now, at first with these rules, it seems that Kerensky is this radical hostile, but in all honesty, he's probably the most sympathetic captor that they have. He ends up growing a little bit fond of the family. And he ends up taking a role of protector so much as just being in charge of their safety. He wants to be the protector from the Bolsheviks for the family, because their position in society has obviously drastically changed, and they were hated. Matter of fact, outside this palace, as they sat as prisoners inside, soldiers dug up the remains of Rasputin and mutilated his body in full view of the palace for Alex to see.
Wow.
So the Romanovs are really depending on Kerensky to protect them. And at this time, the support to put the Romanovs back in power was growing, but the resentment for the family was growing even more. And the Bolsheviks that we talked about earlier are getting closer to the city. And it doesn't look like Kerensky is going to be able to protect them for much longer. So just in time, he and the provisional government agree to have the family move to Tobolsk, Serbia, which is about 1,700 miles to the east, along with 42 servants. And as the family waits to find out their ultimate fate, you kind of have to put themselves in their perspective. Even though they weren't royals anymore, they still had a lot of family members that were royals or in higher positions around the globe, including King of the United Kingdom, George V, which was Nikki's first and closest cousin. I mean, they believe that they're going to be exiled or rescued at any moment by any number of these family members, and they actually try and seek asylum in England at the time, to which it ends up being denied because England's facing a very anti-German sentiment right now, and Alex being German-born, they're just not going to
jive. Yeah.
They're not. Yeah, it's not going to jive with them. So all talks on where to send them were upended eventually for various reasons. And 3 months after the family was moved to Tobolsk, Kerensky's group is overthrown by Lenin and the Bolsheviks, who literally took over in a mere 20 hours. That was all it took. And now we're in a completely more merciless era. So the family is placed first in the governor's house in Tobolsk, where they would end up spending 8 more months in isolation. Now, here they definitely had no social life, and they were prohibited from leaving the mansion grounds. So during these 8 months, a civil war ends up breaking out between the Bolshevik Red Army and a loosely organized opposition known as the White Army, which is made up of liberals and monarchists. And this basically lasts from like October 17th to like November 7th of 1917, until basically the Bolshevik Party gained the majority control in Russia. And once they had the upper hand, the Bolsheviks replaced the provisional government, which means a change in policy, and the Romanovs are now held under the guard of the Red Army. And in the spring of 1918, a new commander, Vasily Yakovlev, was sent to oversee the Romanov captivity. Now, when Yakovlev arrives, he announces that the family is to be moved. However, Alexei can't be moved at this point because he's suffering another hemorrhage. So Alex and Nikki agree to go, along with a few servants, and leave their children behind. I don't know how they did it. I couldn't imagine in this point how you leave your children behind while you're in captivity and all this shit and how much you're hated and everything like that.
While you're under the gun, absolutely not.
Yeah. So they leave their children in Tobolsk, and they are moved to Yekaterinburg, which is 360 miles back to the west. So 360 miles closer back to St. Petersburg. Near the Ural Mountains is where they're at. And this is the kind of place that a political prisoner could literally just disappear. Yekaterinburg is a communist stronghold, and it is surrounded by vast forests. And the Red Army ended up commandeering a wealthy engineer's house because it was away from town, and it could be easily guarded and fortified. It is known as the Ipatiev House, or the House of Special Purpose, which I think is a sick nickname for it. But anyways, barbed wire and a stockade fence are installed. Guards with machine guns were placed on balconies, and the windows were whitewashed and sealed shut, and the interior doors were also nailed shut. I mean, this place became a fortress. And still, the family had high hopes that they were going to be rescued. But these Bolsheviks were quite powerful, even by Lenin's standards. So after Nikki and Alex arrive, they send communication back to the girls telling them that, hey, look, our belongings were searched. Your belongings are going to be searched. They're going to be searching your medications. Now, unbeknownst to the captors, medications was a code word that the family had come up with in case their communications were being watched. And medications was code word for jewels. Now, prior to them leaving the Alexander Palace, they had managed to hide a large amount of jewelry. Diamonds, sapphires, pearls, emeralds, gold, all of it worth over $14 million. Whoa. And they ended up sewing this into their undergarments, corsets, hats, belts, dresses, and also behind buttons. So they're because nobody's going to think to search the children. you know?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Very, very smart plan.
Yeah. And so on May 20th of 1918, the 4 Grand Duchesses, along with Alexei and the rest of the staff, are transferred to Yekaterinburg. And when the girls got into the station, it was the first time that they actually say that they feared for their lives and their well-being. What waited for them were mobs of people calling for their heads and demanding to see the, quote, bloodsuckers. So
Wow.
they're getting into a very hostile area. Upon arrival, some of the staff is immediately taken away. They're taken in a separate direction. Some of the staff members were set free, and other staff members were immediately executed on the spot, just outside of town.
What
Now,
were the parameters for getting set free?
I don't know. I have no idea. I'm going to assume women and children.
Yeah.
And
that
the men
would
were
be
killed.
most likely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's going to be
Probably
just what I know of. They probably, just what I know of this story. I'm going to assume it's women and children that were set free.
Mm-hmm.
So this family is given 8 rooms in this mansion to be divided between the family and their staff members, which consist of their family physician, Dr. Eugene Botkin, Alex's lady-in-waiting, her name is Anna Demidova, their cook, Ivan Karatanov, 2 valets, and a young 14-year-old boy who is the nephew of their footman. His name was Leonid Sednev. Side note here, Leonid arrives in Yekaterinburg with his uncle Ivan, which is pictured here. But Ivan is one of the staff members that initially upon arrival is taken away and he is executed. And the Imperial family and Leonid actually never knew what happened to him. So the family quickly finds out that in this new house that things that they took for granted in the last one are taken away. Anastasia actually attempts to get some fresh air one day by opening a window, and a guard points his gun at her and fires in her direction to get her to stop. So
shit.
What
Yeah.
playing?
they're not playing. But just like with their last captors, the family, and especially the Grand Duchesses, not only win their captors over, but they also caught the eye of a few of them. And specifically, the guards would actually talk about Anastasia's humor, her friendliness, and how full of life she was. And they had these conversations with the girls about their futures and their hopes and dreams and what they wanted. And they eventually said that they actually wouldn't, actually it's a quote, would not mind so much that the Romanovs were allowed to escape. But unfortunately, the rest of the country felt different. Now, during this time, Britain and France are sending substantial armies to fight against the Bolshevik Revolution, restore the imperial regime, and bring Russia back into World War I. The White Army is inching closer and closer by the day, and cities are being taken back, and Lenin actually begins to lose support. So it's about the summer of 1918. The family begins to receive mysterious communications from inside the house. One of them actually reads, quote, "The friends of the Romanovs are no longer sleeping. The hour so long awaited has come. The Czechs are approaching Yekaterinburg and will force the Red Army to capitulate. Be ready at all times for a liberation. Signed, someone who's ready to die for you."
Wow.
However, it was all a farce. The Red Army wanted nothing more than to rid the world of the Imperial family, so they begin to write letters to them, to the family, and put them in like the sugar pot that whenever they got the sugar for their coffee, that they would see the note.
Giving them false hope.
Giving them false hope. And their plan was to be able to catch them in the middle. To be able to catch them in the middle of an escape so that they could use force to stop them, hopefully killing them in the process. But it didn't work. They never tried to escape. And so the guards sat and left. And by now, things in the Ipatiev house are beginning to get extremely laxed. And it becomes time for a checkup. And so the more Bolsheviks come in, led by Yakov Yurovsky, and they tear this house apart, trying to find anything that they can in compromising circumstances for the imperial family. And during this tirade, they actually find Maria, one of the Grand Duchesses, in her own compromising circumstance with one of the camp guards. And that kind of seals the deal for things to become too lax. Yakov Yurovsky, the man we've been talking about, ends up taking control of the Ipatiev house. He sacks all the guards that are too comfortable, and he sends the one that was caught with Maria to prison. Although I found some reports to say that he was actually executed, I can't prove this. I did not find anything that would support that claim.
Mhm.
So Urofsky ends up making them hand over jewelry that they had as well as other values. But the one thing they didn't search was the clothing of the children. So they never found the hidden jewels. And the rules got more intense. After, like, to the point to where they couldn't even have anything. They started requesting a priest over and over and over and over again. And after some time, Urofsky ends up granting them this request. The family was allowed to resume church and almost daily receive necessities and provisions from 2 nuns. And by the time that Urofsky takes over, the Bolsheviks are becoming more and more concerned about how secure the imperial family are at the Ipatiev house. And all the while, negotiations on the release to extended family, it's all falling apart. They can't get them anywhere. Because on one hand, you kind of have this crackdown of order in the house. And on the other hand, you have this white army that's bringing this hope of freedom and all this stuff that's coming. So they're going to end up going to take Yekaterinburg. And the Red Army knows this, and that the Romanovs are going to be freed. I mean, they're so close that the Romanovs can hear gunfire in the distance. That's how close it is. So the final plan's put into place from what I believe that I was able to find, the ones who were calling the shots at that point. Lenin himself, along with Yakov Sverdlov, which was the chairman of the Bolshevik government, their order comes through: execute the imperial family. So on July 16th of 1918, with the White Army only 20 miles outside of Yekaterinburg, Urofsky enters the house, and he tells the kitchen boy, 14-year-old little Leonid, to come with him, that he's going to take him to see his uncle.
Oh, God.
And Leonid is still unaware at the time of what has taken place already. And even from all the memos that I could find, even all the research that I could find, I could not find anything else on little Leonid. But I myself, with it being Urofsky, I can only assume what happened.
You can draw an educated conclusion.
Yeah.
He met a grisly end.
Exactly. So actually what follows next, this is going to be your listener and viewer discretion advised, is the exact sequence written down in the Urofsky memo that Yakov Urofsky would write in later years after this takes place. So the family and the servants retired for the evening. Urofsky has made his assignments of whom is to shoot who, and he ends up excusing some of the men who said that they could not shoot any of the girls or the females. And it's after this that they wait for the code word chimney sweep, letting them know that the truck that they needed had arrived. Well, this truck failed to show at 12 a.m. It still hadn't shown at 1. And finally, at about 1:30 on July 17th of 1918, they get the knock and the word chimney sweep at the door. Urofsky goes and he wakes Dr. Botkin, the family physician, and told him to wake and gather the family, which took about 40 minutes in total. Urofsky actually said in the memo that he didn't want to hurry them, but he rather gave them the time to get dressed. So all the kids are putting on these undergarments, these corsets, these hats, these belts, these dresses, and they're gathering together. And at 2 a.m., this group of men take the prisoners, including the servants, to the basement, some with pillows, some with other items. And Alexei is actually being carried by his father because he is actually too weak to walk at this point. And they enter this room in a basement that had been prepared for them, where they're told that they're to wait here for further instruction and for transport. And so Nicky asks for a chair for his wife and his son, and they sit down and wait. And at first, it looked like a family photo was really about to be taken. I mean, it looked like they could, just snap away. But unbeknownst to the family, a group of men, Urofsky included, were gathered outside with 12 revolvers in their hands. Urofsky opens the door. He and his group of men enter the room, and he reads out loud: Nikolai Alexandrovich, Alexandra Fyodorovna, Alexei Nikolaevich, Olga Nikolaevna, Tatiana Nikolaevna, Maria Nikolaevna, Anastasia Nikolaevna. In view of the fact that your relatives are continuing their attack on Soviet Russia, the Executive Committee of Soviet Workers, Peasants, and Soldier Deputies of the Urals have decided to execute you. Nikki turns around and is only able to ask the word, "What?" And Yurovsky repeated the order and commanded, "Shoot." And Yurovsky shot Nikki in the chest, dropping and killing him instantly. And at the family's horror, Alex was only able to make the sign of the cross before she herself is hit with a hail of bullets and killed. And with the others shooting as well, a multitude of individuals were shot at the same time, Alexei included, being shot several times. And the shooting went on for a long time until Yurovsky was actually able to get it to stop. And once it stopped, Yurovsky noted, still alive was Dr. Botkin, Anna Demidova, Alexei, Tatiana, Anastasia, and Olga. So as some of the group turned to their bayonets, Yurovsky went up and shot Alexei in the head, killing him instantly. However, the bayonets the other men were using were not working either. The reason being is because the undergarments, the dresses, the corsets, the hats, all of that all of the children, including Alexei, had put on, were full of the jewels that they had sewn into their clothing. And even though some of the bullets had hit them, most didn't cause fatal wounds. And the bayonets were also unable to pierce through the clothing. They were essentially wearing the world's most expensive bulletproof armor. And Yurovsky stated he walked up to Dr. Bakin, who was laying on his right elbow, almost in a relaxed position, and shot him in the head, killing him instantly. Yurovsky says he was then forced to go one to the next and shoot each in turn. Tatiana, dead. Olga, dead. Anastasia, dead. When the massacre finally ends, the entire imperial family, Nikki, Alex, Alexei, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, along with servants Dr. Botkin, Anna Demidova, cook Ivan Karatanov, and 2 valets, lay dead in the basement. And the following day, when the next guards arrived for duty at the Ipatiev house, the house was empty. The Romanovs had disappeared. And on this day that they show up for their duty, 6 additional members of the Romanov family were rounded up. Grand Duke Sergei Mikhailovich, first cousin to Nikki's father, brothers, Princes John, Konstantin, and Igor Konstantinovich, Prince Vladimir Pavlovich, who was a second cousin to Nikki, Grand Duchess Elizabeth Fyodorovna, which is the elder sister to Alex, who had also taken up life as a nun after her assassination of her husband, and 2 additional people, Fyodor Remez, which was Sergei Mikhailovich's secretary, and Varvara Alexeyevna Yakovleva, who was a Russian Orthodox nun living in the convent with Elizabeth Fyodorovna, who voluntarily came with Elizabeth. This group was led into the woods near a mine shaft where they were clubbed over the back of the head and shoved in the mine shaft, except for Sergei Mikhailovich. He was shot and killed. The Bolsheviks actually used explosive grenades to try and implode the mine, but it was unsuccessful, and they could actually hear the group singing hymns at the bottom of the mine until they fell unconscious and died. And 8 days later, on July 25th, the White Army took Yekaterinburg. But when they got to the Ipatiev house, only a few items of clothing and some possessions remained. They located the room in the basement with its walls and floor riddled with bullets and blood. And it's assumed the Bolsheviks killed the Romanov captives at this point, but the bodies are nowhere to be found. The Bolsheviks do take responsibility for the execution of Nikki, but as far as for Alex and the children, the Bolsheviks themselves began rumors of their escape. And I think that leads back to the fact they didn't want to see us people who killed innocent women and children. And so these rumors begin to fly all the way until 6 months later in January of 1919, when the Bolsheviks again round up more members, which consist of Grand Duke Dmitry Konstantinovich, first cousin to Nikki's father, brothers Duke Nicholas and George Mikhailovich, first cousins to Nikki, and Grand Duke Paul Alexandrovich, which is Nikki's uncle. And they kill them as well. The point the Bolsheviks had was to execute any bloodline that could be traced back to Nicholas the First. If it was a male heir that was not in exile, they were assassinated at the time. And I've made the chart here to show you that every male heir that it goes to ends with a red mark on their face. They were able to eliminate the entire Romanov line successfully.
Wow.
However, I guess you could say not all of them, because there were some that managed to go into exile. You had the Dowager Empress, which was Nikki's mother, Marie Feodorovna. She ends up in Copenhagen. And then you have her daughters, Grand Duchess Xenia Alexandrovna. Russian words are hard. Sorry, guys. And her sister, Olga Alexandrovna, along with their husbands and children and grandchildren. Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, which was Nicholas II's aunt by marriage. Her and her children managed to escape. Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, which is first cousin to Nikki II. He was the one that was exiled for his involvement in Rasputin's death. And you also have brothers Nicolasha and Grand Duke Peter Nikolaevich, their wives, as well as Peter's children, son-in-law, and granddaughter. And the last one to be able to make it out was Elizaveta Mavrikievna, which was the widow of Konstantin Konstantinovich, who escaped with her daughter, her son, her grandchildren, and some of her in-laws as well. So the Romanov bloodline was finished, and the rule came to an end. And that was until 1920, when a woman comes forward claiming to be the Grand Duchess Anastasia Romanov. Her claim would be taken so seriously and investigated thoroughly that it left many wondering if she actually was the real Anastasia Romanov. Could it be that someone did survive the massacre? And did the bloodline survive with this woman? Questions we will answer on part 2 next week.
Ooh,
You
that
guys
one with a
really did
cliffhanger.
not think that we were going to give you all of the Romanov story today, did you?
No.
Come
The
on now.
Romanov story is way too big, y'all. We gonna have to wrap it up next week.
Mhm.
I know. Some of y'all are like, "That's not fair."
Well, you have to
But
tune
we're
in
gonna
next
talk
week.
about
You got to
her
watch.
tonight. Yeah, we did. We talked about her when she was born, when she allegedly died. You're right. We talked about her.
And now we're gonna tell you the entire story of how this woman comes forward and claims to be Anastasia or Anastasia. Is she? Is she not? I guess you'll have to find out next week, because it is one hell of a ride.
Yeah. I mean, and what a tragic story, man. I mean, just like I said, bad decisions, sins of the father. Talk about sins of the father. You know, like those kids had nothing to do with anything, any decision that their dad made, and they all suffered for his bad decision making.
Yeah.
And it's terrible. And you know, the Bolsheviks were not good people. So
No, they weren't. And to me, it was just literally, you sit here and you think about how decisions affect people's lives. How you make one decision. Had one decision been different,
Yeah.
could the outcome have been a completely different outcome? And it's like he just made a horrible decision after horrible decision after horrible decision.
Well, it's like I said earlier, hindsight is 2020, and maybe he was just governing the best that he knew how.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if he had grown up in that world, I mean, that's what he saw, and that's how he learned from his father. Maybe he just thought this is what you do.
Yeah.
And like we were saying too, he thought he was ordained by God. So any decision that I make is the end all be all because God wants me to be here.
Yeah.
Shelly,
what are your thoughts?
I think that I can't wait to get into the actual story of the lady who claimed to be the Lost Duchess. All of this, if you're thinking about it from a parent's perspective, I get why the Tsarina was fooled. I get why she basically was willing to do anything to make sure her children were safe, even if it did contribute to the downfall of them, of the family with Rasputin and everything. But I again, like most royal families, sins of the father, like you said, Ryan, the sins of the father, it carries and it makes this great ripple effect. That's why today the royal family in the UK are still exiling people that don't behave, and they're like, hey, you got to go live somewhere else. We're gonna. So yeah, it was a string of unfortunate events.
And literally, just for our viewers and listeners, I mean, the amount of work that I put into trying to figure out what came of the Romanov bloodline. I built an entire family freaking tree, dating back. There was a 5-generation family tree that I built because I wanted to make sure that I could trace all the way down to great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren. That literally, that was their whole plan. The Bolsheviks put this whole plan into place, was like, we are tired of these people. We are done. We want to make sure that not a single one can either A, come back into the country, or B, lives to regain power. Because had they left one, that one that was not in exile could have had the right to try and be put back on the throne and put back into power.
And would rightfully need to be there because that was the bloodline ordained by God to rule the country.
Yeah.
So very dangerous. They needed to exterminate all of them like roaches. Had to get rid of all of them.
So all in all, there was 18 Romanov family members that were killed between July of 1918 and January of 1919. 18. It wasn't just the Imperial family and the royal family.
But at least some of them saw the writing on the wall and got out while the getting was good. They were like, no, I think I'm going to go over here to Switzerland or wherever they went.
And the thing is that it was a lot of the women in the Romanov family that fled, that left. A lot of the men did not have a chance. I mean, honestly, they really did not have a chance. I mean, the Bolsheviks just came in, rounded them up, and did away with them.
Executed them where they stood.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have Dmitry Pavlovich, who was exiled for his involvement with the death of Rasputin. But other than that, there's actually one, I think he would be the grandson of Nicholas I. That's the bloodline they were attempting to wipe out. That all of his children, including all of his sons, actually made it out. So, I don't know. Oh, hold on. It says the women could not ascend. That is correct. Back in this time,
women couldn't ascend. You're correct.
Back in this time, the women could not ascend to the throne. That is correct. It was through the male lineage, usually the firstborn son, if he had multiple sons. That was
the heir and the
spare. Heir, yeah.
That was the goal, to have an heir and a spare.
Mm-hmm.
That's another good follow-up question. Why kill the children? I think it was one of those things that they did not want to take a chance at all of the immediate royal imperial the imperial family being able to have any inkling of a right to the throne.
No, I mean, and then you leave them behind, and they come of age and they avenge their father. They get
they could rally the country behind by saying what they seen. They can't leave the witnesses, no matter how young.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what started all the rumors flying, because the Bolsheviks did not want that label on them that they were the killers of innocent women and children. When in reality they were.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they were just heartless motherfuckers. Sorry, pardon my language, but
No.
I did my best to try and get through. I'm
mean,
telling y'all now, when I typed out that whole Urofsky memo and the sequence of events, by the time that I wrapped it up, I was bawling. It's just something. This family has been with me for a month. They've been in my brain. I've lived and walked through their life with them, so to speak, I guess you could say. And it's like I had to read word for word how they were all slaughtered. And it was just, whew.
It's gruesome.
Yeah, absolutely gruesome. So we don't have much to discuss on this episode. However,
that's right. I'm trying not to jump into
this was the history lesson.
Yeah,
this is the backstory.
What we all know, because we all very much know a lot of the story of Anastasia Romanov, and the alleged
claims.
Anastasia's claims that survived. And so I'm trying very hard not to jump ahead. This is a difficult one to discuss. So since we kind of can't jump ahead, are we ready to wrap it up?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up on that, because you'll have to come back next week to figure out how this story concludes. Because there's going to be some major discussions this next week. I promise you. And I will go ahead and tell y'all now, this next week, buckle your freaking seatbelts, because the things that I have found out about this story that's coming up is wild. Wild. That's all I'm going to give you. So with that, whatever social media channel you are watching us from, don't forget we're not just on that social media channel. We are across the board. We are on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, and don't forget our audio versions that you can go listen to on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. Just search everything Vaguely Paranormal and look for the green sound waves. Shelly, take it away.
And if you want to know what we're really talking about, because on here we behave, go and become a Patreon member. It's $5 a month. There's no tiers. It's $5, gets you everything: pre-broadcast, post-broadcast, special Paracon exclusive video. And also, if you're a Patreon member, you are entered to win an exclusive on-screen Ask Us Anything broadcast with us. And if you go into a drawing, yeah, I know. All right. And after that, you go into a secondary drawing. If you get win the on-screen broadcast, go into a secondary drawing where we will draw, and the winners will be taken to an exclusive event that is a Patreon member investigation with us, and we pay for the venue. You just got to get yourself there. So the address is scrolling at the bottom of the screen. So go and become a Patreon member today, $5 a month.
Hell yeah. Now, also, sorry. Also,
Ryan's on cough medicine.
Yes, I am on cough medicine. I apologize, y'all. I don't know if you can tell I sound like crap.
Normally, Ryan's just ready to jump right in with me. So.
Yeah, and I totally just spaced for a second. Sorry, guys. So, also, like and subscribe. Please tell two friends, have them tell two friends about us if you like what we do. Go to any podcast where you get any of your fine podcasts. Please hit the subscribe button. Please leave a review. Please give us all the stars you can. 5 stars. And also go to YouTube and hit the subscribe button. When you hit the subscribe button, it'll alert you to anything we post on YouTube.
Got some great things coming.
We have some really, really cool things coming. We also have a new documentary coming out after the first of the year. There has been a teaser trailer already posted about the Old Park Hotel that we did with scarenetwork.tv. So go check out that trailer. Also, 2 Question Tuesday on Patreon. If you submit a question, we'll submit your questions to us on Patreon. We answer one question in the pre-broadcast and one question in the post-broadcast. And if you have any questions, please send those to where they send that to, Blake.
theevppod@gmail.com. That's THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Like, share, and subscribe.
Well, y'all, thank y'all so much for joining us for another week of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I am Blake Smith, and for my friends, partners in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Ryan Roberts. We will see y'all next Tuesday. Good night.
Bye, y'all.